In the quiet corners of the American frontier, where the fireflies dance in the twilight and the only music is the crackle of a campfire or the lonely cry of a fiddle, a name echoes through the trees. It's a name that has become more than just a man. It's a legend. Davy Crockett. You've probably heard it before, sung in ballads and whispered in stories told from one generation to the next. Davy Crockett, king of the wild frontier. He was the bear hunter, the congressman in a coonskin cap, the larger-than-life hero who could grin a squirrel right out of a tree. The tailies painted him as a giant, a man who wrestled lightning and rode a bolt of it to the ground. These were the stories that built the myth, that carved his face onto the Mount Rushmore of American folklore. But myths, as grand as they are, often cast a shadow over the real person. Behind the legend of the king of the wild frontier, there was a man of flesh and blood, a man born in the backwoods of Tennessee, who lived through times of incredible change and turmoil in a young, sprawling nation. He was a pioneer, a soldier, a politician, and a father. His life was a complex tapestry woven with threads of ambition, integrity, and a deep-seated love for the wilderness and the common man. So, how did this frontiersman from humble beginnings become one of the most enduring symbols of American identity? How did the man, Davy Crockett, become the legend? That's the journey we're about to embark on. This isn't just about reciting the tall tales, though we'll certainly have some fun with those. This is about peeling back the layers of the myth to find the historical truth. We'll walk the trails he walked, from the forests of Tennessee to the halls of Congress in Washington, D.C., and ultimately to the dusty walls of a small mission in Texas called the Alamo. We'll explore the world that shaped him, a world of untamed wilderness, political firestorms, and the relentless westward push of a nation finding its footing. We'll look at the real-life events that inspired the fantastic stories. What was it about this particular man that captured the imagination of a country? What made his life story the perfect material for the ballad that would make him immortal? This is a story about the intersection of man and myth, history and folklore. It's about how a nation, in its youth, created heroes to define itself. Through Crockett's own words, from his autobiography, and through the accounts of those who knew him, we will try to understand the principles he lived by. His famous motto, "Be sure you're right, then go ahead," wasn't just a catchy phrase. It was a code that guided his every action, from hunting in the woods to challenging a sitting president. We'll investigate his political career, where this plain-spoken frontiersman stood up against powerful figures like President Andrew Jackson, championing the rights of squatters and Native Americans, often at great personal and political cost. This was a side of Crockett. The ballads you and always sing about the principled politician who valued his conscience more than his career. And finally, we'll travel with him on his last great adventure to Texas, a journey that would seal his fate and cement his place in the pantheon of American heroes forever. The story of the Alamo is one of the most famous last stands in history. But we'll look beyond the heroic sacrifice to understand what led him there. What was he searching for in Texas? Was it a new beginning? A final stand for his beliefs? Or something else entirely? So, pull up a log by the fire and let the sounds of the frontier carry you back in time. We're going to separate the man from the myth, the history from the tall tale. And in doing so, we might just discover that the real Davy Crockett was even more remarkable than the legend he inspired. This is more than a biographer. It's an exploration of the American spirit itself, seen through the eyes of one of its most iconic sons. Join us as we uncover the true story of the man they called the King of the Wild Frontier. It's a tale filled with adventure, courage, and a powerful legacy that still resonates today. Make sure you're subscribed and have hit that notification bell, because you won't want to miss a single chapter of this incredible saga. Now, let's begin. All right, folks, welcome back. Last time, we left off with the story of the Crockett family, a clan of tough, independent pioneers who carved a life out of the American frontier. Today, we're diving deep into the childhood of the man who would become a legend. David, or as the world would come to know him, Davy Crockett. Our story begins on August 17th, 1786, in a small, rough-hewn cabin nestled in the untamed wilderness of what was then the state of Franklin and what we now know as Greene County, Tennessee. A future icon was born. This wasn't a land of manicured lawns and white picket fences. This was the raw, unforgiving frontier, a place where survival was a daily struggle and the line between life and death was real. Davy was born to John and Rebecca Crockett, and he was the fifth of 9 children. Imagine that household. 9 kids running around a small frontier cabin. John Crockett was a man constantly on the move, always chasing the next opportunity, trying to build a better life for his sprawling family. He was a farmer, a miller, a tavern keeper, and even served as a local magistrate. But success was a slippery thing in the post-revolutionary era. The family faced constant financial hardship. Debts mounted, ventures failed, and they moved several times during Davy's early years, always searching for greener pastures. This constant instability wasn't easy, but it shaped young Davy in profound ways. He didn't have a formal education in the way we think of it today. His classroom was the vast, sprawling wilderness that surrounded his home. The rustling leaves were his textbooks. The tracks of a deer were his arithmetic problems, and the call of a wild turkey was his music lesson. From a very young age, Davy was handed a rifle. It wasn't a toy, it was a tool. It was the key to putting food on the family table. While other boys might have been learning to read and write, Davy was learning to read the forest. He learned how to move silently through the trees, how to track game for miles, and how to make every single shot count. Ammunition was precious, and a miss could mean the difference between a full belly and a hungry night. These early hunting expeditions were more than just chores. They were adventures that forged his character. Out there, alone in the deep woods, a boy had to rely on his wits, his courage, and his senses. He learned to be self-reliant, to solve problems on the fly, and to be comfortable with solitude. The forest taught him patience, perseverance, and a deep, abiding respect for nature. He learned the rhythms of the seasons, the habits of the animals, and the secrets of the land. This environment also instilled in him a powerful sense of independence. On the frontier, you couldn't just call for help. You had to be the help. If something broke, you fixed it. If you got lost, you found your own way back. This do-it-yourself spirit became a core part of Davy's identity. He saw his father and the other settlers around him battling against the odds every single day, and it taught him that a person's worth was unmeasured by their wealth or their family name, but by their grit and their ability to stand on their own 2 feet. But it wasn't all work and no play. Life on the frontier, while hard, had its moments of joy and camaraderie. Community was everything. Neighbors, who might live miles apart, would come together for barn raisings, harvests, and celebrations. Davy would have soaked in the stories told around the crackling fires of his father as tavern tallies, of the revolution, of Indian fights, of harrowing encounters with bears and panthers. These stories, filled with heroism and adventure, fired his young imagination. It was during these formative years that Davy's famous restless spirit began to take root. He was a boy who couldn't sit still. The confines of a cabin or a classroom felt like a cage to him. He yearned for the freedom of the open woods, the thrill of the hunt, and the promise of what lay over the next ridge. He was driven by an insatiable curiosity and a desire to see what was out there, beyond the familiar clearings and creek beds of his home. This restlessness would lead him into his first great adventure at the tender age of 12. His father, still struggling with debt, hired Davy out to a man named Jacob Seiler to help drive a herd of cattle over 400 miles to Virginia. Can you imagine that? Just 12 years old, setting off on a journey that would test even a grown man. He was homesick and miserable, and when Seiler tried to make him stay on in Virginia, Davy knew he had to escape. Under the cover of a snowstorm, he slipped away in the dead of night, beginning a long, perilous journey home on foot. He traveled for weeks, relying on the kindness of strangers and the survival skills he'd learned in the Tennessee back. This journey was a crucible. It tested his endurance, his resourcefulness, and his sheer will to survive. When he finally stumbled back home, he wasn't the same boy who had left. He was tougher, more confident, and more certain than ever that he was the master of his own destiny. His return, however, didn't mean a settled life. His relationship with his father was often strained. Not long after, following a dispute at Schoolies, he did have a brief and tumultuous encounter with formal education that lasted all of 4 days. Davy ran away from home again. This time, he would be gone for nearly 3 years. During this period, which he later called his strategic withdrawal, Davy wandered through Tennessee, Virginia, and Maryland. He worked odd jobs of farmhand, a wagoner, a hatter's apprentice. He was living hand to mouth. But he was free. He was learning about the world not from books, but from first-hand experience. He met all sorts of people, saw different ways of life, and honed the skills that would serve him for the rest of his days. He learned how to negotiate, how to read people, and how to tell a story, a skill that would later make him famous. When he finally decided to return home at the age of 15, he was a changed young man. He walked into his family's tavern, and at first, they didn't even recognize him. He was taller, stronger, and carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had seen the world and survived it on his own terms. His family was overjoyed to have him back, and the reunion was a joyous one. To make amends with his father and settle the family's outstanding debts, Davy worked for a full year for men his father owed money to. He worked off one debt, then another, proving his loyalty and his newfound sense of responsibility. With the family slate wiped clean, he was finally free to work for himself. These early years, from 1786 to the turn of the century, were the bedrock upon which the legend of Davy Crockett was built. His frontier childhood was a relentless, challenging, and often brutal education, but it gave him an iron will, an unshakable sense of self-reliance, and a deep connection to the American wilderness. He wasn't born a legend. He was forged into one by the hardships and adventures of his youth. The restless boy who ran away from home was well on his way to becoming the man who would capture the imagination of a nation. And that's where we'll leave it for today. The foundation is laid. Next time, we'll see how this young man, hardened by the frontier and filled with a spirit of adventure, begins to make his own mark on the world, falling in love and starting a family of his own. Thanks so much for watching. If you're enjoying this journey into the life of Davy Crockett, do me a huge favor and hit that like button, and make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next chapter. We'll see you next time. Have you ever felt so misunderstood, so trapped, that your only option seemed to be to run? That's exactly where we find a young Davy Crockett in the fall of 1798. He was just 12 years old, but a fiery spirit already burned within him. A sharp, bitter conflict with his father, a man known for his stern discipline, became the spark that lit the fuse. One moonless night, with a knot in his stomach and his few belongings bundled in a cloth, Davy slipped out of his family's log cabin and into the vast, unforgiving wilderness of East Tennessee. He was running away from home. He didn't have a plan, not really. The only thought driving him forward was the need to put distance between himself and his father's anger. His first real taste of the world was as a helper for a cattle drover, a man named Jesse Cheek. Imagine this: a boy, barely a teenager, guiding a massive herd of cattle over 400 miles, all the way to Virginia. The days were long, the work was tough, and the nights were spent under a blanket of stars, a lonely sentinel in a world far bigger than he'd ever imagined. This journey wasn't just about miles covered. It was about the hardening of his hands and the sharpening of his mind. He learned to read the weather in the clouds, to find his way by the sun, and to bargain for a meal with the little money he earned. In Virginia, he found work with a wagoner named Adam Myers. The clatter of wagon wheels and the rhythmic plod of the horses became the soundtrack to his life. He crisscrossed the state, hauling goods from town to town, listening to the stories of travelers, merchants, and farmers at every stop. But independence has a price, and for Davy, it was a profound and aching loneliness. There were nights when the campfire felt like the only warm thing in a cold, indifferent world. He missed the familiar sounds of his family's cabin, the taste of his mother's cooking, even the gruff presence of the father he had fled. He saw families gathered in the warm glow of their homes, and felt a pang of longing so sharp it took his breath away. This was the other side of freedom. The silence, the isolation, the heavy weight of being utterly on his own. He spent months, then years, on the road. From Virginia, he journeyed to Maryland, working for a hat maker in Baltimore. The bustling city was a world away from the quiet forests of Tennessee. The sheer number of people, the noise, the towering buildings, it was overwhelming. But Davy was a quick study. He learned to navigate the city's crowded streets just as he had learned to navigate the winding trails of the backcountry. He was a survivor. During this time, the world was his schoolhouse. Every person he met was a teacher. Every new town, a classroom. He learned about human nature, the kindness of strangers who offered him a meal, and the cunning of those who would try to cheat a young boy out of his wages. He learned the value of a dollar earned through hard sweat, and the simple joy of a dry place to sleep. The road was a harsh master, but its lessons were unforgettable. It stripped away his boyish innocence and replaced it with a rugged self-reliance. One day, something shifted. The anger that had propelled him away from home had cooled, replaced by a deep yearning for the very thing he had run from. He was older now, maybe 15, and the world no longer seemed so frightening. He had faced it, and he had endured. He decided it was time to go home. The journey back was different. He wasn't running from something anymore. He was walking toward something. He walked for weeks, retracing his steps, his heart a mix of anxiety and anticipation. What would he find? Would his father still be angry? Would his family even recognize him? He arrived at the family tavern unannounced. His sisters were the first to see him. A tall, lanky stranger standing in the doorway. It took them a moment, but then a cry of recognition broke the silence. "It's Davy." His mother wept with joy, and his father, the man whose anger had driven him away, stood speechless. In that moment, all the bitterness melted away. They saw not the defiant boy who had left, but a young man who had returned, forged by the world into something new. The reunion was emotional, a healing of old wounds. Davy, in turn, saw his father not as a tyrant, but as a man burdened by the hardships of frontier life. His return marked the end of his wandering, but the beginning of something else. The boy who ran away had come back, a storyteller. His experiences on the road, the long miles, the diverse characters, the lonely nights, and the lessons in Savala had filled his mind with tales. He could hold a room captive, spinning yarns about his adventures with a wit and charm that were entirely his own. The lonely boy had found his voice, and in doing so, had discovered the heart of a storyteller. This transformation, from a runaway boy to a master narrator of the American frontier, was the true treasure he brought back home. His journey was over, but his legend was just beginning. Thank you so much for joining me on this chapter of Davy Crockett's incredible life. It is a powerful reminder that sometimes the hardest roads lead us exactly where we need to be. If you enjoyed this story, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so you don't miss what happens next. We'll see you in the next video. Welcome back to our journey through the life of a true American legend. Today, in Chapter 4, we witness a young man coming of age, not in a bustling city or a quiet town, but on the raw, untamed edge of the Tennessee frontier. This is where the boy we met truly becomes the man of the wild. Imagine this: a world without paved roads, grocery stores, or street lights. Your backyard isn't a manicured lawn. It's an endless expanse of ancient forest, teeming with life and fraught with peril. This was his reality. Every day was a lesson, and the classroom was the great outdoors. His teachers were the rustle of leaves, the crack of a twig underfoot, and the whisper of the wind through the pines. He wasn't just learning to survive. He was learning to thrive in a world that demanded respect and skill in equal measure. His education began with the tools of the trade. The long rifle wasn't just a weapon. It was an extension of his will, a provider of food, and a defender of his home. Hours turned into days, days into weeks, spent in the deep woods, learning the art of marksmanship. He wasn't practicing on paper targets. His targets were squirrels darting up hickory trees, the flicker of a deer's tail in the brush, or a turkey gobbling in the morning mist. Each shot counted. A miss meant an empty stomach or a wasted ball and powder. It was through this relentless practice that he honed his legendary aim, becoming what his neighbors would soon call a crack shot. The rifle became as familiar to him as his own hand. But being a crack shot was only part of the equation. A frontiersman had to be a master of woodcraft. He learned to read the forest like a book. He could tell the direction by the moss on the trees, predict the weather by the behavior of the animals, and track a buck for miles through the most rugged terrain. He learned which plants were food, which were medicine, and which were to be avoided. He could build a shelter from fallen branches and find his way home by the stars. The forest wasn't a place of fear. It was his sanctuary, his provider, his home. He understood its rhythms, its secrets, and its dangers. This deep, intimate knowledge of the wild set him apart. Life on the Tennessee frontier was a constant test of endurance. The winters were especially brutal. Snow would fall for days, blanketing the landscape in a thick, white silence, cutting off families from their nearest neighbors. The cold was a physical presence, seeping through the chinks in the log cabin walls. It was during these harsh months that the skills he learned were put to the ultimate test. The food they had preserved in the fall had to last. Hunting became more challenging, as animals hunkered down and tracks were quickly covered by fresh snow. It was a stark, demanding existence, but it forged an iron will and an unbreakable spirit. Yet, for all its hardships, the frontier offered something priceless: freedom. Out here, a man was judged not by his family name or his wealth, but by his character and his abilities. It was the freedom to carve out a life with your own two hands, to breathe the clean, crisp air of the mountains, and to live by your own code. This profound sense of liberty was the lifeblood of the frontier. It was the call of the wild, the promise of a new beginning, and it echoed in the heart of every settler who dared to venture west. It was this call that he answered with every fiber of his being. As his skills grew, so did his reputation. But it wasn't just his marksmanship that people noticed. In a place where your nearest neighbor might be miles away, your character was your currency. He became known as a good-natured and reliable young man, always ready to lend a hand. Did a neighbor need help raising a barn? Was there. Was a family running low on meat during a long winter? He'd share his hunt without a second thought. He was quick with a story, a joke, and a helping hand. This wasn't just kindness. It was the foundation of community on the frontier. These early settlements were more like extended families than simple collections of houses. Survival depended on cooperation. People relied on each other for everything from defense to childbirth. These community bonds were forged in the fire of shared hardship and mutual respect. When a new family arrived, the entire community would come together to help them clear land and build their cabin. These log rollings and barn raisings were social events, filled with hard work, hearty food, and a powerful sense of togetherness. It was a society built on trust and the simple understanding that they were all in it together. In this environment, he was a product of his time and place, a hunter, a woodsman, a neighbor. He embodied the spirit of the American frontier. Self-reliant, yet community-minded, tough as nails, but with a generous heart. He was learning the most important lesson of all, that a man's worth is measured by his integrity and his service to others. This chapter of his life, spent in the crucible of the Tennessee wilderness, wasn't just about learning to shoot a rifle or track a deer. It was about the forging of a character. It was about understanding the delicate balance between independence and interdependence. The boy was gone, and in his place stood a young man of the frontier, confident, capable, and ready for the adventures that lay ahead. The foundation had been laid, and the legend was just beginning to take shape. Thank you so much for joining us for this chapter. The story is only getting started, and you won't want to miss what happens next. If you enjoyed this glimpse into the past, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so you're notified when we continue our journey. We'll see you next time. Hello, history lovers, and welcome back to our journey through the life of an American legend. Today, we're diving into Chapter 5, a deeply personal and pivotal chapter in Davy Crockett's story. A tale of profound love and devastating loss. Before he was the larger-than-life figure we remember, Davy was a young man with a heart full of hope, and that heart belonged to Polly Finley. Polly wasn't a character in a told tale. She was a real, vibrant woman, the daughter of a local farmer. When Davy met her, it was an instant connection. Their courtship was a simple, honest frontier romance, built on shared values and a dream for the future. In 1806, they married, ready to build a life together from the ground up. Imagine their life for a moment. Forget the grand halls of Congress for now. Picture a small log cabin nestled in the wilds of Tennessee. The air is filled with the scent of wood smoke and pine. The sounds of the laughter of children, the chopping of wood, and the gentle hum of Polly's spinning wheel. This was Davy's world, and it was his everything. He wasn't just a hunter. He was a husband and a father. He and Polly welcomed their first son, John Wesley, and then a second, William. Their family was completed with the birth of their daughter, Margaret. Life was hard, no doubt. The frontier demanded constant work and vigilance, but it was also filled with simple, profound joys. The satisfaction of a successful hunt that put food on the table, the warmth of the fire on a cold night with his family gathered close, the pride in watching his children grow, strong and spirited, under Polly's loving care. These years with Polly were perhaps the happiest and most grounded of Davy's life. He found in his family a purpose greater than any adventure. He was content. He was home. But the frontier that gave so much could also take away in the blink of an eye. In 1815, while Davy was away serving under Andrew Jackson in the Creek War, tragedy struck. The exact cause is lost to history, perhaps a sudden illness or complications from childbirth. But the result was the same. Polly Finley Crockett passed away, leaving Davy a widower with 3 young children to care for. Imagine the crushing weight of that news. Davy returned home not to the warm embrace of his wife, but to the devastating silence of her absence. His world, so carefully and lovingly built, had shattered. The joy of their cabin was replaced by an aching void. He now faced the daunting task of being both mother and father to his children, navigating his own immense grief while trying to comfort theirs. This was a crucible for Davy Crockett. It would have been easy to surrender to despair, to let the bitterness of his loss consume him. Many men would have broken. But this is where we see the true steel and his character being forged. The grief didn't just wound him, it reshaped him. It carved into him a new depth of resilience and a fierce, protective devotion to his family. He couldn't do it alone. An no Italiano. In Tosede's community and family were everything. Davy's brother and sister-in-law moved in to help care for the children, a testament to the tight-knit bonds of frontier life. But the home still felt incomplete without a mother's presence. Davy understood that his children needed the stability and care that only a complete family could provide. It was this practical need, mingled with the hope of finding companionship again, that led him to his next chapter. He soon met Elizabeth Patton, a widow herself with 2 children. They understood each other's loss. They shared a common ground of grief and responsibility. In 1816, they married, blending their 2 families into one. This wasn't just a marriage of convenience. It was a partnership born of mutual respect and a shared desire to rebuild their lives and create a stable, loving home for their 5 children. The loss of Polly was a scar that Davy Crockett would carry for the rest of his days. It tempered his adventurous spirit with a profound understanding of life's fragility. It taught him that true strength wasn't just about wrestling bears or fighting in battles. It was about getting up after you've been knocked down, about shouldering responsibility in the face of sorrow, and about finding the courage to love again. This period of love and loss was not just a chapter in his personal life. It was the foundation upon which the man, the myth, and the legend would be built. Thank you so much for joining us for this emotional and important part of Davy Crockett's story. It's these human moments that truly bring history to life. If you found this chapter as moving as I did, please hit that like button. And do you want to forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you do want to miss Chapter 6? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Until next time, stay curious. Have you ever felt like you've been knocked down by life, only to find a second chance waiting just around the corner? That's exactly where we find Davy Crockett at the start of this chapter in his incredible story. After the heartbreaking loss of his first wife, Polly, Davy was left a young widower with 3 small children to raise on the harsh Tennessee frontier. The future must have looked incredibly bleak, but destiny, as it often does, had a different plan. In the close-knit world of the frontier, word traveled fast. A woman named Elizabeth Patton, herself a widow, heard of Davy's plight. She wasn't just any woman. Elizabeth was strong, capable, and had a story that mirrored Davy's own. Her husband had been tragically killed during the Creek War, leaving her to care for her own 2 children. She understood loss, she understood hardship, and she understood the immense challenge of raising a family alone in a world that was always kind. Now, This wasn't some grand, fairy tale romance. It was a meeting born of practicality, mutual respect, and a shared understanding of life's deepest sorrows. Imagine two people, both bearing the scars of loss, finding in each other a partner to face the future. Davy, known for his directness, saw in Elizabeth a woman of incredible character and resilience, and Elizabeth saw in Davy a man of integrity, a devoted father who was struggling to hold his world together. Their courtship was likely simple and honest. There were no fancy balls or elaborate gifts. There were conversations by the fireside, shared chores, and the quiet observation of two single parents watching their children play together. They were two halves of a fractured whole, looking for a way to become complete again. It was a practical match, yes, but it was also a match of hearts that understood each other's pain. In 1815, Davy Crockett and Elizabeth Patton made the decision to join their lives and their families. Their marriage wasn't just a union of two people. It was the blending of two families, two sets of children who had already lost a parent. Imagine the scene: 5 children, all of varying ages, suddenly brought together under one roof. It must have been chaotic, challenging, and full of adjustments. Davy's children, Wesley William and Margaret Tunn. Elizabeth's, but this is where the character of both Davy and Elizabeth truly shines. They weren't just creating a household, they were building a home. They were creating a new family unit from the fragments of their old ones. This required immense patience, compassion, and a deep well of love. Davy, despite his rough-and-tumble exterior, was a loving father. He treated Elizabeth's children as his own, and she, in turn, embraced his. Together, they navigated the squabbles, the rivalries, and the shared joys of a large, blended family. This experience shaped Davy profoundly, teaching him lessons in diplomacy, fairness, and the art of bringing different people together for a common good, skills that would serve him well later in life. Their new life was set against the backdrop of a rugged and unforgiving landscape. They settled on Elizabeth's property along the Nalechke River in East Tennessee. Life was a constant struggle against the elements. The land had to be cleared, crops planted, and the home protected. Every day was a testament to their hard work and cooperation. Davy would spend his days hunting in the dense forests, providing meat for their large family. His legendary skills as a woodsman were not for sport. They were essential for survival. Elizabeth, meanwhile, managed the bustling household, a monumental task in itself. She was the anchor of the family, ensuring the children were fed, clothed, and cared for, turning their simple cabin into a place of warmth and stability. This period was more than just about survival. It was about building a community. On the frontier, you couldn't survive alone. Neighbors relied on each other for everything from barn raisings to mutual defense. And in this environment, natural leaders quickly emerged. Davy Crockett was one of those leaders. People were drawn to his honesty, his common sense, and his unwavering fairness. When there was a dispute between neighbors, they wouldn't go to a distant judge. They'd often go to Davy Crockett. He had a knack for listening to both sides and finding a solution that was just and equitable. He wasn't formally educated in the law, but he possessed something far more valuable: a deep, intuitive understanding of right and wrong. His courtroom was often just the shade of a large oak tree. His law book was his own conscience, and a firm belief in treating every person with respect, regardless of their station in life. If someone's livestock wandered onto another's property, Davy would help them sort it out. If there was a disagreement over a boundary line, he'd walk it with them and help them find a fair compromise. This role as an informal community leader was the crucible where his political identity was forged. It wasn't something he sought out for power or prestige. It was a duty he felt to his friends and neighbors. He saw that for a community to thrive, there had to be order, justice, and cooperation. He believed in the power of the common person to govern themselves with integrity. These early experiences blending his family, carving a life from the wilderness, and serving as a local arbiter of justice laid the essential foundation for the man who would later go on to represent the people of Tennessee in the state legislature and eventually in the United States Congress. This chapter of New Beginnings shows us a different side of the legendary Davy Crockett. It's the story of a man rebuilding his life, a husband creating a new family, and a neighbor stepping up to lead his community. It was in these quiet, challenging years on the Tennessee frontier that the core principles of his character, his sense of duty, his commitment to fairness, and his deep connection to the common person were solidified. This wasn't just a new beginning for his family. It was the true beginning of the public man, the legend that we remember today. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey into the life of Davy Crockett. If you enjoyed this story and want to learn more about this American icon, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next chapter. We'd love to have you as part of our community. Until next time, take care. Welcome back to our journey through the life of a frontier legend. Today, we're diving headfirst into one of the most formative and brutal periods of his life, the Creek War. We're in Chapter 7, where a young man steps away from the familiar woods and into the chaos of conflict. The year is 1813. Tensions that have been simmering for years between the United States and factions of the Creek Nation are about to boil over. The War of 1812 is already raging, and its flames are spreading south. Following the devastating Fort Mims massacre, a wave of fear and a thirst for retribution swept across the frontier. In Tennessee, a call went out, a powerful summons for volunteers to join the militia. And the man who answered that call, a man who would lead them, was none other than the tough-as-nails Andrew Jackson. For our hero, the decision to enlist wasn't simple. He had a young family, a life he was building. The thought of leaving them behind was a heavy burden, but the call to defend his home, to protect his community, was stronger. It was a duty he felt in his bones. So, with a heavy heart but a resolute spirit, he said his goodbyes and joined the ranks of the Tennessee militia under General Jackson. The familiar life of a hunter and farmer was over. The life of a soldier had begun. He quickly discovered that the army had a unique need for his particular set of skills. While others drilled with muskets in formation, his talents were best used on the fringes, in the shadows of the forest. He became a scout. His days were spent ranging far ahead of the main army, his eyes and ears serving as the army's first line of defense. He knew how to read the land, to spot a broken twig or an unnatural silence that signaled danger. He was a ghost in the woods, tracking enemy movements, gathering intelligence, and ensuring the army didn't march blindly into an ambush. And when he wasn't scouting, he was hunting. An army, as they say, marshes on its stomach, and Jackson's militia was often on the brink of starvation. Supply lines were unreliable, stretched thin across the unforgiving wilderness. It was here that his skills as a woodsman became not just useful, but essential for survival. He would slip away from camp, his trusty rifle in hand, and return with deer or turkey. He wasn't just a soldier, he was a provider, his marksmanship keeping his fellow militiamen from starving. He shared everything he brought back, earning the respect and admiration of his comrades who were less at home in the deep woods. But this was no hunting trip. This was war, and its realities were harsh and unrelenting. He witnessed firsthand the brutal nature of the conflict. He saw courage in the face of terrifying odds, men standing firm as battle raged around them. He saw men he knew, friends he'd shared a campfire with, fall in battle. The human cost was staggering, a grim tally that weighed on the soul of every soldier. He experienced the gnawing pain of true hunger, days on end with nothing but a few roasted acorns to eat. He saw the desperation in the eyes of his fellow soldiers, their bodies weakened, but their spirits somehow unbroken. He learned that courage wasn't about the absence of fear, but about acting in spite of it. Marching 4 miles on an empty stomach, sleeping on cold, wet ground, and then rising to face a determined enemy. This was the brutal rhythm of his life. The campaign was a series of grueling marshes and vicious skirmishes. Battles like Tallushatchee and Talladega were bloody, chaotic affairs. Our scout was in the thick of it, using his knowledge of the terrain to his advantage, fighting not in neat lines, but from behind the cover of trees. He proved himself to be a reliable and brave soldier, never shying away from a fight. But his heart grew heavy with the violence he witnessed. He saw the grim aftermath, the cost of victory written on the land and on the faces of the survivors. One of the most defining moments of the war was the climactic Battle of Horseshoe Bend in March 1814. This was the final, decisive confrontation. Andrew Jackson's forces surrounded the Red Stick Creek warriors in their heavily fortified village. The battle was ferocious, a desperate struggle with no quarter asked and none given. He was there, a participant in the carnage. The experience was searing, a vision of hell on earth that would be forever etched into his memory. He fought with the same tenacity as everyone else, but the scale of the destruction left a profound mark on him. After Horseshoe Bend, the war was effectively over. A treaty was signed, and the soldiers, weary and worn, began the long journey home. Our man was no longer the same person who had left his family months earlier. He had seen the best and worst of humanity. He had endured starvation, faced death, and taken part in a conflict that reshaped the American South. He had served his term with honor, but the experience had changed his perspective on glory in war. He had seen enough fighting to last a lifetime. Returning home, he was greeted as a hero. He had done his duty, but as he embraced his family and looked out over his quiet homestead, the sounds of the forest were different. They were no longer just the sounds of nature, but echoes of his time as a soldier, a scout, and a hunter in the Creek War. This chapter of his life was closed, but its lessons about courage, survival, and the terrible cost of conflict would shape the man he was yet to become. Thank you so much for joining me for this chapter. The story is far from over, and the path ahead is filled with new adventures and challenges. If you enjoyed this glimpse into a pivotal moment in history, please hit that like button, and be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss what happens next. We'll see you in the next chapter. The long walk home from the war was a quiet one. Every step through the familiar woods and across the rolling hills of Tennessee felt different. The birds sang the same songs, the creeks babbled the same tunes, but the man walking beside them was not the same one who had left. The war had etched itself onto Davy Crockett's soul, leaving behind a silence where there once was only the boisterous call of the wild. He had seen things no man should see, done things that weighed heavily on a spirit meant for the open frontier. The horrors of conflict, the loss of friends, the brutal reality of it all, had reshaped him. He came home not just a soldier, but a man profoundly changed, carrying the ghosts of the battlefield with him. But as the Tennessee soil settled under his boots, a new chapter began. News of his bravery, his uncanny skill, and his leadership during the Creek War had traveled faster than he had. It wasn't just talk among soldiers. It was fireside stories told by settlers, whispers of respect from folks who had never even met him. They didn't just see a soldier, they saw a protector, a man who stood firm when danger came knocking. They called him a hero. It was a heavy title, one he never asked for. He was just Davy from the backwoods, but to his people, he was becoming something more. His name carried weight, and when he spoke, people listened. They saw in him not the ambition of a politician, but the steady hand of a natural leader, someone who understood their struggles because he lived them too. This growing reputation pulled him in two directions. His heart was always at home, with his family, in the quiet embrace of the wilderness he loved. The call of the hunt, the peace of a morning mist rising off the river, that was his paradise. The love for his hearth and kin was the anchor of his life. But then there was the call of duty, not the duty of a soldier anymore, but the duty to his community. He saw his neighbors facing hardships, struggling against forces they couldn't fight alone. He felt a responsibility to use his newfound voice to speak for them, to be their champion. It was a constant tug-of-war within him. The simple man who craved the solitude of home versus the hero his people needed him to be. This was the central conflict of his life, balancing the quiet love for his family with the loud call to serve the common good. This pull towards public service brought him face to face with a world he was beginning to deeply distrust. He started to spend more time around men of politics, men of power and government. And he didn't like what he saw. He saw ambition that wasn't for the people, but for personal gain. He heard promises made in grand halls that were forgotten by the time they reached the humble cabins of the frontier. These powerful men, with their fancy words and polished boots, seemed disconnected from the real lives of folks like him. They played games with laws and land, games that had real, often devastating, consequences for the hardworking families he knew. A seed of suspicion was planted in his mind, a growing conviction that power, left unchecked, would always corrupt. He saw that the fight for freedom didn't end on the battlefield. A new, more subtle war was being waged in the halls of government, and he was starting to realize he might be called to fight in that one too. His political journey began not with a grand announcement, but with a simple act of service. He was appointed as a local magistrate, a justice of the peace. In T's role, he wasn't dealing with complex legal theories. He was settling disputes between neighbors, helping folks navigate everyday problems. His courtroom wasn't a stuffy chamber. It was off in the shade of a large oak tree. His law book was his own conscience, his own innate sense of right and wrong. He judged with what he called natural-born sense, cutting through the nonsense to find a fair solution. People trusted his judgment because they trusted him. They knew he wasn't trying to trick them with legal jargon. He was just trying to do what was right. This experience reinforced his belief that good governance wasn't about fancy degrees or powerful connections. It was about honesty, integrity, and a genuine desire to help your fellow man. From the local courthouse, his path led him to the state legislature. It was a bigger stage, with bigger players and higher stakes. Here, his distrust of the political elite solidified. He saw firsthand how laws were crafted to benefit the wealthy and the well-connected, while the needs of the common farmer and frontiersman were ignored. He became a loud, unwavering voice for the people of the backwoods. He wasn't polished. He wasn't eloquent in the way the city lawyers were, but he was authentic, and his words rang with a truth that couldn't be ignored. He fought against land speculators and unfair banking practices, becoming a thorn in the side of the establishment. He learned that being a leader meant being willing to stand alone, to be unpopular with the powerful in order to be true to the people you represent. This journey, from the battlefields of the Creek War to the political battlegrounds of Nashville, was a profound education. The soldier who returned home, haunted by what he'd seen, was slowly being forged into a new kind of warrior. He was learning that the greatest threats to his people weren't always armed with rifles. Sometimes they were armed with contracts and legislation. His reflection was no longer just that of a hunter or a soldier. It was the reflection of a statesman in the making, a reluctant hero stepping out of the woods and into the arena driven by a simple, unshakable love for his home and a growing distrust of those who would seek to control it. The path ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. Davy Crockett wouldn't be silent. His voice, born in the wilderness, was about to echo through the halls of power. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this chapter of our story, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more. We'll see you in the next one. Welcome, bike history buffs and adventure seekers. Today, we're diving into a pivotal moment in the life of a true American legend. We've followed him through the untamed wilderness, seen him face down bears, and survive against all odds. But what happens when the king of the wild frontier decides to step into the world of politics? That's right, we're exploring Chapter 9, The Rise of a Local Politician. Get ready, because Davy Crockett is about to trade his hunting rifle for a gavel. And things are going to get interesting. After years of living a life dictated by the seasons and the hunt, Crockett found himself drawn into the affairs of his community in a way he never expected. It started small. His neighbors, the folks who knew him best, saw something special in him. They didn't see a rough, uneducated backwoodsman. They saw a man of unwavering principle, a man who was fair and honest. They needed someone to settle their disputes, to keep the peace. And so, David Crockett became a justice of the peace. Imagine the scene. A makeshift courtroom. Maybe under a large oak tree or in a simple log cabin. On one side, you have seasoned lawyers with their fancy words and leather-bound books. On the other, you have Crockett, relying not on legal jargon, but on common sense and a deep understanding of human nature. He listened to both sides of a story, cut through the noise, and delivered judgments that were, above all, fair. His courtroom wasn't about complex legal theories. It was about doing what was right. People trusted him because he was one of them. He spoke their language, understood their problems, and shared their values. This role as a magistrate was his first taste of public service, and it showed him that he could make a difference, not just for his family, but for his entire community. But Crockett's reputation for honesty and straight talk couldn't be contained to a local courtroom. Soon, people were urging him to aim higher. They wanted a voice in the state legislature, a voice that sounded like theirs. The idea of running for state representative was daunting. Crockett knew he was different from the other candidates. He didn't have a formal education, he wasn't wealthy, and he certainly didn't know how to deliver a polished, eloquent speech. What he did have was a treasure trove of stories from the frontier, a quick wit, and a genuine connection with the common folk. So, he hit the campaign trail. Crockett style. Instead of giving lofty speeches from a podium, he'd join folks at community gatherings, barbecues, and shooting matches. He'd tell a hilarious story about a bear hunt that would have everyone in stitches. And then, while they were all laughing, he'd seamlessly pivot to talk about the real issues affecting their lives. Unfair land laws, the need for new roads, and the struggles of pioneer families. He wasn't trying to be a sophisticated politician. He was just being himself. And the people loved him for it. His campaign speeches were legendary. He once famously told a crowd, "I'm like a fellow I saw once, who was walking along a muddy road. He had a coonskin cap on, and he was carrying a rifle. A man in a fine carriage stopped and asked him if he knew the way to the state capitol. The fellow said, 'No, but I'm going there myself, and if you follow me, we'll find it together.'" That was Crockett's message in a nutshell. He didn't pretend to have all the answers, but he was determined to go to the Capitol and fight for the people who were walking that same muddy road of life alongside him. This contrast between his backwoods simplicity and the polished world of politics was his greatest strength. While his opponents talked down to the voters, Crockett talked with them. He made politics accessible. He showed them that a man didn't need a fancy education or a silk vest to understand what was right and what was wrong. His humor was his secret weapon. It disarmed his critics and endeared him to the voters. They saw him not as a politician seeking power, but as a neighbor willing to serve. And so, against all odds, the man from the backwoods was elected to the Tennessee state legislature. It was a stunning victory that sent a clear message. The people were tired of the old way of doing things. They wanted representation that was authentic, honest, and fearless. When Crockett arrived at the state capitol, he must have felt like a fish out of water. He was surrounded by men who had spent their lives studying law and politics. They wore fine clothes and spoke in a way that was foreign to him. But Crockett refused to be intimidated. He held onto his buckskin clothes and his plain-spoken style. He knew why he was there. His vision was crystal clear: to be a voice for the voiceless, to stand for the common folk. He wasn't there to play political games or to enrich himself. He was there to fight for the rights of the squatters and settlers who were the backbone of the state. He saw how the system was often rigged in favor of wealthy land speculators and powerful interests, and he made it his mission to level the playing field. In the legislature, he quickly became known as a man who could not be bought or swayed. When he believed a bill was unjust, he would stand up and oppose it with all his might, often using his signature blend of humor and heartfelt appeal to win over his colleagues. He championed laws to protect the rights of poor settlers and to ensure that the government served the people, not the other way around. He was a constant reminder that the power of the government comes from the consent of the governed, from the ordinary men and women toiling on the frontier. This chapter in Crockett's life is so much more than just a political origin story. It's a powerful lesson in leadership and authenticity. Crockett proved that you don't have to change who you are to make a difference. In fact, it was precisely his refusal to conform, his dedication to his roots and his people, that made him so effective. He brought the honesty of the wilderness into the halls of power, challenging the status quo and reminding everyone what true public service looks like. His rise from justice of the peace to state legislator wasn't just a personal victory. It was a victory for every common person who ever felt overlooked or unheard. Davy Crockett's political journey was just beginning, but these early years set the stage for the national icon he would become. He established himself as a champion of the people, a man whose word was his bond and whose heart was always with the folks back home. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey into the life of Davy Crockett. It's a story that continues to inspire us with its lessons of integrity and courage. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. And do you not forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you won't miss our next chapter. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Until next time, stay curious. Well, howdy folks, and welcome back to our journey through the larger-than-life story of Davy Crockett. When we last left our hero, he was making a name for himself in the Tennessee legislature. But a bigger stage was calling, and in 1827, The man from the backwoods answered. He was elected to the United States Congress, packing his buckskins and his homespun wisdom for a trip to the nation's capital. Washington, D.C. now. You have to picture this. Here's a man who grew up wrestling bears, or so the stories go, who knew the language of the forest better than the language of a legal document, and suddenly, he's dropped into the heart of American politics. For Davy, Washington was a world stranger than any uncharted wilderness he'd ever explored. He saw men in powdered wigs and fancy suits, speaking in a way that seemed designed to confuse rather than clarify. They'd debate for hours over things that, to Davy, seemed plain as day. He wrote about the endless dinners and formal parties, where the food was fancier than anything he'd ever seen, but the conversation was often stale and full of flattery. He saw politicians making deals in smoky backrooms, promising one thing to a man's face and doing another behind his back. It was a place of ambition, intrigue, and what he called political maneuvering to a straight-shooter like Crockett. It was all a bit much. He felt like a fish out of water, or maybe more like a bear in a ballroom. He famously said that the city's water, drawn from the local springs, was the only honest thing he'd found in Washington. But here's the thing about Davy Crockett. He wasn't one to be intimidated. He might not have had the formal education of his colleagues, but he had something more valuable: common sense, and a direct line to the heart of the common man. He decided right then and there that he was going to change who he was just to fit in. If Washington was going to have Davy Crockett, it was going to get the real deal. So, when it was his turn to speak on the floor of the House of Representatives, he didn't try to sound like some fancy lawyer from Boston or a wealthy planter from Virginia. He spoke like Davy Crockett. His speeches became the talk of the town. They were filled with the same humor, wit, and rustic charm that had won over voters back in Tennessee. He used tall tales and folksy anecdotes to make his points, cutting through the complicated jargon of his opponents. Imagine the scene: a stuffy chamber filled with serious-faced men, and up stands this figure in his plain, frontier-style clothes. Instead of citing obscure legal precedents, he'd tell a story about hunting a raccoon or trying to cross a flooded river. And you know what? It worked. People listened. He could make his colleagues laugh with a well-timed joke, and then drive home a serious point about the national debt or the rights of settlers on the frontier. He became a sensation. Newspapers across the country printed his speeches, often exaggerating his backwoods persona even further. They loved this character, the congressman from the canebrake. He was a breath of fresh air in the often stifling atmosphere of Washington politics. He championed the cause of the poor squatters and settlers on the frontier, fighting against land speculators and powerful banks that he felt were taking advantage of the common folk. He believed the government's job was to help people, not to get tangled up in its own complicated rules. One of his core principles was simple: a politician should do what the people who elected him want him to do. He saw himself as a direct representative, a messenger for his constituents. I often sighed, I am at the service of the people who sent me here. This simple, powerful idea was radical in a town where many politicians seemed more interested in serving their own ambitions or the interests of wealthy donors. But this straightforward honesty would eventually get him into trouble. He was originally a supporter of President Andrew Jackson, another Tennessean and a fellow frontiersman. But as Jackson's presidency went on, Crockett began to disagree with some of his policies, particularly the Indian Removal Act, which sought to forcibly move Native American tribes from their ancestral lands. Crockett had lived alongside Native Americans and had a deep respect for them. He saw the policy as a cruel and unjust betrayal against immense pressure from his own party and from the incredibly popular President Jackson. Davy Crockett stood up in Congress and spoke passionately against the Indian Removal Act. He knew it was political suicide. He knew it would anger the president and cost him supporters back home. But his conscience wouldn't let him stay silent. He said, "I would rather be honestly and politically damned than to be hypocritically immortalized." It was a moment of incredible political courage. His stand against Jackson did indeed cost him. The full force of Jackson's political machine was turned against him in his next election, and he lost his seat in Congress. But Davy wasn't one to sit around and mope. He used the time to go on a book tour, promoting his autobiography, which became a national bestseller. The book further cemented his image as an American folk hero, a man of principle who stood up for what was right, no matter the cost. He eventually won his seat back, returning to Washington more famous and more defiant than ever. But the political winds had shifted. His independent streak and his opposition to the powerful Jacksonian Democrats made it harder and harder for him to be effective. He grew increasingly frustrated with the endless political games and the back-and-forth bickering. He felt that the government was no longer serving the people. After losing his final bid for re-election in 1835, he gave a fiery and famous farewell speech. Disgusted with the state of politics, he stood before his constituents and declared, "I told the people of my district that I would serve them as faithfully as I had done, but if not, they might go to hell, and I would go to Texas." It was a shocking and blunt statement, even for him. He felt that the political system had become broken, that the will of the people was being ignored. Before leaving Washington for good, he captured his frustration perfectly. He looked at the grand dome of the Capitol building, at the institution he had tried so hard to serve with honesty and integrity, and he washed his hands of it. In a final, powerful declaration of his independence and his faith in a higher power and the common citizen, he said, "I leave this Congress to God Almighty and the people." And with that, Davy Crockett, the congressman from the frontier, turned his back on Washington, D.C. He had arrived as a curiosity, but left as a legend, a symbol of rustic integrity in a world of political compromise. But his story was far from over. A new, wild, and dangerous frontier was calling his name, Texas. And that's where our adventure will take us next. Thanks so much for watching, everyone. It's been a pleasure sharing this chapter of Davy's incredible life with you. If you enjoyed it, please hit that like button. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you don't miss our next episode, where we follow Davy Crockett on his fateful journey to Texas and the Alamo. We'll see you then. Welcome back to our series on the life of Davy Crockett. Today, we delve into a defining chapter of his story, a moment that would test his principles and reshape his political career forever. This is the story of his clash with one of the most powerful men in America, President Andrew Jackson. The year is 1830. And the political landscape in Washington is charged. President Jackson, a fellow Tennessean and Crockett's former commander in the Creek War, puts forth a controversial piece of legislation, the Indian Removal Act. The act proposed a forced relocation of Native American tribes, including the Cherokee, Creek, Choctaw, Chickasaw, and Seminole, from their ancestral lands in the southeastern United States to territory west of the Mississippi River. For many politicians, especially those from the South and West, supporting Jackson was the clear path to political survival and advancement. Jackson was immensely popular, a war hero, seen as a champion of the common man. To oppose him was to risk not only his powerful wrath, but also the support of their own constituents, many of whom coveted the land occupied by the Native American nations. But for Davy Crockett, this wasn't about political calculation. It was a matter of right and wrong. He had lived alongside Native Americans, fought with them and against them. He had seen firsthand the treaties signed and the promises made by the United States government. He believed these treaties were sacred contracts, and the Indian Removal Act was a blatant and immoral violation of those agreements. As the debate raged in the halls of Congress, Crockett took a stand. He rose to speak, not as a frontiersman or a politician, but as a man of conscience. He argued passionately against the bill, pleading for the honor of the nation. He reminded his colleagues of the treaties that guaranteed the tribes their land. He spoke of the injustice of forcibly uprooting thousands of people from their homes, farms, and the graves of their ancestors. This was not a popular position. His political allies were stunned. They warned him, pleaded with him. They told him he was committing political suicide. By opposing Jackson, he was alienating the very base that had elected him. He was turning his back on his party and his president. The pressure was immense. Friends became adversaries, and the whispers in the hallways turned to open threats against his career. Think about that for a moment. Imagine standing in a room where every powerful force is pushing you in one direction. Your friends, your party, the president, and even the voters back home are all telling you to do one thing. Yet, your own moral compass, your own sense of justice, is pointing in the complete opposite direction. What do you do? This was the crucible in which Davy Crockett found himself. His decision was unwavering. He valued his integrity more than his office. This conviction is perfectly captured in one of his most famous and powerful quotes. When confronted with the political fallout of his actions, Crockett declared, "I would rather be honestly damned than hypocritically immortalized." Let that sink in. He would rather be condemned for doing what he believed was right than be celebrated for doing what he knew was wrong. This single sentence reveals the core of his character. It's a profound statement about the price of integrity. For Crockett, holding a political office was meaningless if it required him to sacrifice his principles. True honor wasn't found in a title or a position of power, but in being true to oneself and to the promises one makes, both to people and to a nation. His opposition was not a quiet protest. Crockett voted against the Indian Removal Act. The bill passed anyway, but by an incredibly narrow margin in the House of Representatives. Crockett's vote, and his vocal opposition, had made him a marked man. The consequences came swiftly, just as his allies had predicted. Andrew Jackson and his powerful political machine targeted Crockett. When he ran for re-election, they threw their full support behind his opponent. They painted him as a man who had betrayed his own people, siding with Native Americans over his white constituents. The smear campaign was effective. In the 1831 election, Davy Crockett lost his seat in Congress. He had paid the ultimate political price for his moral stand. He was out of a job, cast out from the world of Washington politics. It was a bitter defeat, a stark lesson in the realities of power. He had chosen his conscience over his career, and his career had been taken from him. But the story doesn't end there. Crockett's defeat was not a moment of shame for him. Instead, it became a part of his legend. He returned to Tennessee, not with his head bowed, but with his integrity intact. He wrote his former colleagues, making it clear he had no regrets. He knew he had done the right thing, and that was more valuable than any election. This chapter of Crockett's life is perhaps the most important for understanding the man behind the myth. He wasn't just a caricature in a coonskin cap. He was a man of deep moral conviction who was willing to lose everything for what he believed in. His clash with Andrew Jackson over the Indian Removal Act showcases the timeless struggle between political expediency and personal integrity. It's a story that resonates even today. How often do we see leaders face similar choices? How many are willing to risk their power, their position, and their popularity to stand up for a principle they believe is right, especially when it's an unpopular one? Crockett's actions serve as a powerful reminder that true leadership is on daba, following the polls or bending to pressure. It's about having a moral compass and the courage to follow it, no matter the cost. His defiance in the face of overwhelming political power cemented his legacy not just as a folk hero, but as a statesman of profound character. He may have lost the political battle, but in the long arc of history, he won a moral victory that continues to inspire. Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into a pivotal moment in Davy Crockett's life. His story is a powerful lesson in courage and principle. If you found this video insightful, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing to our channel for more stories like this. Don't forget to hit that notification bell so you won't miss our next chapter. We'll see you next time. They say what goes up must come down. For Davy Crockett, the political darling of the frontier, this old saying was about to hit home with the force of a Tennessee thunderstorm. Welcome back to our series, where we're uncovering the real story of the king of the wild frontier. Today, we're diving into Chapter 12, Crockett's dramatic fall from power. Crockett's rise in Washington had been meteoric, but his independent spirit, the very thing that made him a legend, would become his political undoing. He couldn't stand idly by and watch President Andrew Jackson's policies, particularly the Indian Removal Act. Crockett saw it for what it was, a brutal and unjust land grab from Native American tribes who had been promised their ancestral homes. He believed it was a stain on the nation's honor, and he wasn't afraid to say so, even if it meant defying the most powerful man in the country. This decision put him on a collision course with the entire Jacksonian political machine. In his home state of Tennessee, Jackson was a hero. By opposing him, Crockett was seen by many as a traitor to his party and his people. He had stood for his conscience, but the political price was steep. The backlash was immediate and fierce. Newspapers loyal to Jackson painted him as an opportunist and a turncoat. His former allies abandoned him, and the powerful political network he had once been a part of now worked tirelessly against him. Crockett's principles had cost him dearly. When the election of 1831 rolled around, the full force of Jackson's political machine came down on him. They poured resources into his opponent's campaign, and Crockett, for the first time in a long while, tasted defeat. He lost his seat in Congress. For a man who had fought bears and charted the wilderness, this political loss was a different kind of wound. He was sent packing back to the forests of Tennessee, his voice in Washington silenced. But you can't keep a good man down, especially not one as stubborn as Davy Crockett. He spent the next 2 years back home, but he wasn't just licking his wounds. He was reconnecting with the very people he had always fought for. He traveled, he listened, and he wrote. During this time, he co-authored his famous autobiography, a book that cemented his legend and spread his story far and wide. It was a brilliant move, reminding the American public of the authentic, straight-talking frontiersman they had first fallen in love with. His storytelling paid off. In 1833, riding a wave of renewed popularity from his book, and a growing dissatisfaction with some of Jackson's more aggressive policies, Crockett made a stunning comeback. He won back his seat in Congress, returning to Washington not as a humbled man, but as a folk hero with a mandate. It seemed like a triumphant return, a vindication of his principles. He was back in the halls of power, ready once again to fight for what he believed in. But Washington had changed, or perhaps it had only become more of what it always was. The political game was dirtier, the party lines more rigid. Crockett's second act in Congress was even more frustrating than the first. He continued his vocal opposition to the Jackson administration, but he found himself increasingly isolated. His folksy charm and common-sense arguments were no match for the entrenched power and partisan spite that defined the era. He was a man of the frontier, lost in a swamp of political maneuvering. The constant battles wore him down. He saw deals being made in back rooms that went against the interests of the common man. He saw principles being sacrificed for power. The hope and optimism that had carried him to Washington were slowly being eroded by the bitter reality of politics. He was a man out of time and out of place, and his enemies were circling, ready to finish the job they had started years before. The political machine was determined to crush him for good, and in 1835, they succeeded. In another bruising election, Crockett lost his congressional seat once again. This time, the defeat felt final. He had given it his all, fought the good fight, and stood by his conscience. But the system had rejected him. The people, swayed by party politics and powerful interests, had turned their backs on their frontiersman hero. The disappointment was immense, a deep and personal blow to a man who had always believed in the power and wisdom of the common people. This final loss was the last straw. Crockett was thoroughly disillusioned with the United States and its political circus. He felt the country he had fought for was losing its way, corrupted by power and greed. But as one door closed, another, much larger one, opened in his mind. He started hearing whispers from the Southwest, tales of a vast, untamed land fighting for its own independence. A place called Texas. The idea of Texas sparked something in him. It represented a new beginning, a fresh start, a place where a man could still carve out a destiny based on courage and hard work, not political connections. It was a land of opportunity, a new frontier, much like the Tennessee of his youth. The disillusionment he felt with Washington was replaced by a surge of renewed hope and a thirst for adventure. It was in this moment of bitter farewell and new resolve that Crockett reportedly uttered his most famous, and perhaps most defiant, words as he prepared to leave his old life behind. He looked back at the political establishment that had cast him out and declared, "You may all go to hell, and I will go to Texas." It was a quintessential Crockett line, blunt, defiant, and full of the frontier spirit. He was turning his back on the politics of the old nation and riding toward the dawn of a new one. His journey to Texas wasn't just a retreat, it was a reinvention. He was no longer Congressman Crockett, the politician. He was Davy Crockett, the pioneer, the adventurer, the legend. Once more, his fall from power in Washington had, in a strange and fateful way, set him on the path to his ultimate destiny, a destiny that awaited him at a small, dusty mission in San Antonio. Thank you so much for joining us for this chapter of Davy Crockett's incredible life. His story is a powerful reminder that sometimes, What looks like a defeat is actually the start of a whole new adventure. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the final, dramatic chapters of this American legend. We'll see you next time. Well now, pull up a chair and let me tell you a story. A story about a time when the world felt both bigger and smaller. A time when a man could pack up his life and chase a dream clear across the country. This is the story of 1835, the year I left Tennessee behind and set my sights on a new horizon called Texas. It wasn't an easy decision. Leaving the rolling hills I'd called home. Tennessee was in my bones, the smell of the pines, the cool whisper of the mountain streams. But a restlessness had taken hold of me. A feeling that my story was meant to be written on a bigger page. News had been trickling in 4 years about a place called Texas, a vast territory under Mexican rule, offering land and a new beginning to anyone bold enough to claim it. The promise of it was like a fever, and I wasn't the only one who'd caught it. Saying goodbye was the hardest part, shaking my father's hand, seeing the worry and the pride in his eyes. A hug from my mother that I can still feel to this day, her whispering a prayer for my safety. Packing was simple enough. A good rifle, a sturdy knife, a bedroll, some salt pork and hardtack, and the few keepsakes that mattered. Everything I owned, strapped to the back of a mule. I took one last look at the old homestead, etching every detail into my memory, and then I turned my face to the west. I didn't look back. The trail was a living, breathing thing, a river of people, all flowing in the same direction. We were a motley crew, that's for sure. Stern-faced farmers with their families packed into covered wagons, their worldly possessions rattling with every bump in the road. Young fellas like me, with nothing but a rifle and a pocket full of dreams. There were trappers, traders, even a few preachers, hoping to save souls in the wilderness. We were strangers, but we were bound by a common purpose. We were all headed for Texas. In those first few weeks, we traveled through lands I recognized. The forests of Tennessee gave way to the flattered country of Arkansas. We forded rivers, the cold water a shock to the system, and pushed our way through thickets and swampland. Every evening, we'd circle the wagons, light our fires, and the air would fill with the sounds of a temporary community. The low murmur of conversations, the laughter of children, someone playing a sad tune on a fiddle. We Saret food-swapped stories, and stood to guard together against the uncertainties of the night. You learn to trust a man quickly out on the trail, to judge him by his actions, not his words. We crossed the great Mississippi River on a ferry, the sheer size of it humbling. It felt like a true dividing line, a final farewell to the world we knew. On the other side, the landscape began to change. The trees grew sparser, the hills softened, and the sky just seemed to open up. It was bigger, bluer, more immense than any sky I had ever seen back home. We entered the territory of Mexican Texas, and it was like stepping into another world. The land stretched out before us, an endless sea of grass that rippled in the wind. Plains so vast, they made you feel small and insignificant, yet so full of possibility, they made your heart swell. Herds of buffalo, thousands strong, would thunder across the horizon. A sight so powerful it would stop our entire wagon train in its tracks. Wild mustangs, sleek and beautiful, would watch us from a distance, their manes flying in the breeze. The air itself felt different. It was cleaner, drier. The sun seemed to beat down with a fiercer intensity. The nights were a spectacle all their own, with no city lights to wash them out. The stars were like scattered diamonds on black velvet. The Milky Way was a brilliant, shimmering band across the heavens. Lying on my bedroll, looking up at that cosmic display, I felt a sense of peace and a sense of profound loneliness all at once. We met other travelers along the way. Some were heading east. Their dreams of Texas soured. They told tales of hardship, of drought, of skirmishes, and the heavy hand of the Mexican government. But for every person turning back, there were 10 of us pushing forward, our optimism undimmed. We heard stories of rich soil, perfect for cotton and corn, of vast ranches where a man could build an empire of cattle. We talked of freedom, of living under our own rules, of carving out a life from scratch. This wasn't just a journey across the land. It was a journey inward. With every mile, I shed a piece of the boy I was and became more of the man I was meant to be. The trail was a harsh teacher. It taught you patience when a wagon wheel broke miles from anywhere. It taught you resilience when a sudden storm turned the trail to mud. It taught you humility when you ran low on water. I remember one evening, sitting by the fire with a man named Jedediah, an old trapper with a face like a weathered map. He'd been all over the West. It looked that May, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "This land," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "It either makes a man or breaks him. There ain't no in-between." And I knew he was right. The idea of Mexican Texas was a curious thing. We were, in essence, becoming citizens of another country. We were expected to obey Mexican laws, to learn the language, to even adopt their faith, at least on paper. For most of us, these were just formalities, stepping stones on the path to owning our own piece of this incredible land. But you could feel the undercurrent of tension, a quiet but growing friction between the new American settlers and the Mexican authorities. Whispers of tariffs, of restrictions, of a government far away in Mexico City that didn't understand our ways or our desire for self. But for now, those were just whispers on the wind. My focus was on the horizon, on the promise of a new start. Every sunrise was a call to adventure, every sunset a mark of progress. We were a small band of hopeful souls, moving across an ancient landscape, drawn by a dream of freedom and a patch of earth to call our own. This was my journey to Texas, a journey that would change my life and the course of history forever. And believe me, the story was just getting started. Thank you so much for joining me on this first part of the journey. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring that bell so you don't miss the next chapter. We've got a lot more trail to cover. See you next time. Hello and welcome back to our journey through the life of an American legend. Last time, we left Davy Crockett at a crossroads, his political career in Washington behind him, his eyes set on a new horizon. Today, we follow him as he rides into a land simmering with tension and poised on the brink of history. Texas. This is Chapter 14. Arrival in a land of conflict. As Crockett and his companions crossed the Sabine River into Texas in early 1836, they weren't just entering a new territory. They were stepping into a whirlwind. The air itself seemed to crackle with the energy of rebellion. Texas, then a part of Mexico, was a powder keg. American settlers, who had been invited in to populate the vast, untamed land, were now at odds with the Mexican government under President Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna. Centralist policies coming out of Mexico City clashed fiercely with the settlers' fiercely independent frontier spirit. They had grown accustomed to a certain level of autonomy, and now that was being stripped away. Tensions that had been simmering for years were finally boiling over. Everywhere Crockett looked, he saw the signs. Men gathering in taverns, their voices low but passionate, cleaning rifles, and casting determined glances toward the south. The talk was not of if a revolution would happen, but when. And Crockett, a man who had never shied away from a fight for freedom, found himself right in the middle of it. Imagine the scene. This larger-than-life figure, the king of the wild frontier, rides into a town. Word spreads like wildfire. Crockett's here. Davy Crockett is in Texas. Almost overnight, he was no longer just a former congressman seeking a new start. He was a symbol. For the Texan rebels, his arrival was a massive morale boost. He was a celebrated Indian fighter, a seasoned politician who had stood up to President Andrew Jackson, a living legend, choosing to cast his lot with them. He was greeted not just as a man, but as an omen of victory. Dinners were held in his honor. Settlers and would-be soldiers flocked to hear him speak, hanging on his every word. They saw the hero from the almanacs, the bar-wrestling, straight-shooting frontiersman they'd read about. His celebrity preceded him, painting a picture of an invincible champion for their cause. He was instantly offered a command, a position of authority in the burgeoning Texan army. The people wanted a hero to lead them, and in Crockett, they believed they had found him. But here's where the story gets more complex, where the man behind the myth emerges. Crockett was flattered by the attention, no doubt. He was a man who enjoyed a good story and the warmth of an admiring crowd. However, he graciously turned down the offer of an officer's commission. "I have come to aid you all I can in your noble cause," he reportedly said. but I wish to be a high private in your army. I don't want any office." This was a profound statement. Beneath the coonskin cap and the grand reputation was a man who, at his core, valued humility and service. He wasn't seeking power or glory. He had seen the ugly side of politics and ambition in Washington. In Texas, perhaps he was searching for something purer, a cause he could believe in, without the baggage of command. He wanted to stand shoulder to shoulder with the common man, to fight not as a general, but as a volunteer, a citizen soldier defending the principle of liberty. As he traveled deeper into Texas, from Nacogdoches to San Augustine, Crockett's encounters revealed this dual nature. On one hand, he was the celebrity, regaling crowds with his folksy humor and captivating tales from the frontier and the halls of Congress. He was a natural storyteller, and his presence was electrifying. He spoke of liberty, of the right of people to govern themselves, and his words resonated deeply with the settlers who felt their own rights were being trampled. He was the voice of the American ideal, transported to the sun-scorched plains of Texas. On the other hand, in quieter moments, he was simply David Crockett of Tennessee. He listened intently to the stories of the settlers' their hardships, their dreams for this new land, and their fears of Santa Anna's approaching army. He wasn't just a symbol, he was a fellow frontiersman who understood their struggle on a personal level. He saw in them the same grit and determination that had defined his own life. It's fascinating to consider what was going through his mind. He was 50 years old, an age when many men would be looking to settle down. Yet here he was, voluntarily entering a war zone. Was he seeking a final, grand adventure to seal his legend, or was he genuinely moved by the Texans' plight, seeing in their fight a reflection of the American Revolution fought by his own father's generation? The answer is likely a bit of both. He was a man of action, and the prospect of a just fight was invigorating. He wrote letters home filled with optimism about the land, calling it a paradise, a place where a man could build a new life. He saw a future in Texas, not just a fight. He saw fertile soil, not just a battlefield. This wasn't a death wish. It was a quest for a new beginning, a place where the principles he held dear could flourish. This period, between his arrival and his fateful journey to the Alamo, is crucial to understanding the man. It strips away the caricature and shows us a person of substance and conviction. The legend wanted him to be a general, a larger-than-life hero leading the charge. But the man, Davy Crockett, simply wanted to be a good soldier in a cause he believed in. He sought peace for his own soul and a place to put down new roots. Yet, fate had other plans. The path to peace, he would soon discover, led directly through the heart of the conflict. He wasn't just arriving in a land of conflict. He was arriving at his own destiny. A destiny that would be forged in the fire and blood of a small, dusty mission in a town called San Antonio de Bexar. His quest for a new start was about to become an immortal last stand. Thank you so much for joining us for this chapter. The story is building towards its dramatic and poignant conclusion. If you're finding this journey as fascinating as I am, please hit that like button, and be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next episode, where we follow Crockett to the walls of the Alamo. We'll see you then. Howdy folks, and welcome back to our journey to the pages of history. Today, we're diving headfirst into a story that has echoed through the generations, a tale of courage, sacrifice, and the fight for freedom. We've arrived at Chapter 15, San Antonio and the Alamo. So, saddle up, because we're riding into one of the most iconic moments in American history. The year is 1836. The air in Texas is thick with tension, buzzing with the whispers of revolution. Our story picks up as a small but determined group of volunteers makes its way to the heart of the conflict. A dusty, sprawling town named San Antonio de Bexar. The early winter sun casts long shadows as they ride, their faces set with a mixture of hope and apprehension. They are doctors, lawyers, farmers, and frontiersmen, men from all walks of life, drawn together by a common cause. They've heard the call for aid, the desperate plea for defenders of a fledgling republic, and they've answered it. As they approached the town, a unique structure rose from the landscape, dominating the skyline. It wasn't a grand palace or a modern military fort. It was an old Spanish mission, its limestone walls weathered by decades of sun and rain. This was the mission San Antonio de Valero, but history would remember it by another name: the Alamo. For these men arriving in the early days of 1836, it was simply a place to make their stand. They couldn't have known then that they were stepping onto sacred ground, a place that would soon become a symbol of defiance against overwhelming odds. The Alamo was a peculiar fortress. Originally built as a place of worship and sanctuary, its purpose had been repurposed by the winds of war. The sprawling compound, with its long barracks, courtyard, and the iconic, unfinished church, was now a military garrison. Walking through its gates felt like stepping back in time. The walls were thick, pockmarked from previous skirmishes, telling stories of a long and complex history. The volunteers immediately set to work, reinforcing the defenses, digging trenches, and mounting the few cannons they had. The old church, with its gracefully curved facade, became the powder magazine and final point of defense, its hallowed halls now storing the instruments of war. There was a palpable sense of destiny hanging in the air, a feeling that this old, crumbling mission was where their fates would be sealed. Among the defenders gathering at the Alamo were men who would become legends. It was here that friendships were forged in the crucible of shared purpose. Two figures, in particular, stood out: William Barrett, Travis, and James Bowie. Travis, a 26-year-old lawyer and lieutenant colonel in the Texan Army, was a man of passion and principle. He was articulate, driven, and possessed an unshakable belief in the cause of liberty. His letters from the Alamo would become some of the most powerful and moving documents in American history. He was the mind and the voice of the garrison. Then there was Jim Bowie, already a living legend on the frontier. Bowie was a rugged, formidable figure, known for his fearsome fighting skills and the iconic knife that bore his name. He was older, more pragmatic, and commanded immense respect from the volunteer fighters. Though he and Travis were co-commanders and often had different ideas on strategy, a deep, mutual respect grew between them. They were two sides of the same coin. Travis, the idealistic officer, and Bowie, the seasoned frontiersman. Together, with other brave men like the famous Tennessean Davy Crockett, they formed the leadership of this small, determined force. They shared meals, traded stories, and planned their defense, united by the dangerous reality of their situation. For a few weeks, an uneasy quiet settled over San Antonio. This was the calm before the storm. The days were spent drilling, scouting, and improving the fortress. The nights were filled with the sounds of a camp preparing for battle, the clang of a blacksmith's sledgehammer, the low murmur of conversation around a campfire, the distant strum of a guitar. The men knew that the Mexican army, led by General Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna himself, was marching towards them. They knew they were outnumbered, outgunned, and isolated. Yet, in this brief period of quiet anticipation, a powerful sense of camaraderie and resolve took root. They weren't just a collection of individuals anymore. They had become a brotherhood. They found strength in each other, sharing stories of their homes and families, and of the future they were fighting to create. It was a time of reflection, of steeling their nerves for the inevitable confrontation. The sun would rise and set over the Alamo, each day bringing the enemy closer, and with each passing moment, the legend of this place grew stronger. The air grew colder, the supplies dwindled, and the reality of their predicament became starkly clear. Travis sent out desperate pleas for reinforcements, his words filled with a fiery determination. "I shall never surrender or retreat," he wrote. "Victory or death." These were not the words of a man expecting to lose, but of a man who understood the price of freedom. He knew that their stand at the Alamo, win or lose, would be a rallying cry for the rest of Texas. It was a conscious decision to sacrifice themselves for a cause greater than their own lives. The men of the garrison understood this too. They had come to the Alamo to defend a principle, and they were prepared to see it through to the end. This period, this calm before the storm, is what makes the story of the Alamo so powerful. It wasn't just a battle, it was a choice made by ordinary men who found themselves in an extraordinary situation. They looked at the crumbling walls of the old mission and saw not a tomb, but a fortress of liberty. They looked at each other and saw not strangers, but brothers in arms. The sun was about to set on this brief chapter of peace, and the world would soon learn the names of Travis, Bowie, Crockett, and the brave defenders of the Alamo. Their stand would ignite a fire across Texas, inspiring an army that would ultimately secure the independence they so dearly cherished. The stage was set, the players were in place, and the final, tragic, and heroic act was about to begin. Thank you so much for joining me on this chapter of our historical journey. The story of the Alamo is a testament to the human spirit's capacity for courage in the face of impossible odds. If you found this story as moving as I do, please hit that like button, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss what happens next. We've got so much more to explore together. Until next time, stay curious and keep learning. Welcome, bike history lovers, to our journey through the heart of the Texas Revolution. Today, we arrive at a moment etched forever in the annals of courage and sacrifice. Chapter 16. The siege begins. The air in San Antonio de Bexar had been thick with tension for days, but on the morning of February 23, 1836, that tension finally shattered. From the bell tower of the San Fernando Church, a sentinel's cry cut through the morning chill. He had spotted them, the vanguard of General Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna's formidable army, their banners and bayonets glinting under the Texas sun. The long-feared moment had arrived. Inside the crumbling walls of the old mission known as the Alamo, the alarm spread like wildfire. The defenders, a motley but determined group of fewer than 200 men, scrambled to their posts. This wasn't a professional army. They were Texian colonists, American volunteers, and Tejano's local Texans of Hispanic descent, united by a fierce desire for independence. They were frontiersmen, doctors, lawyers, and farmers, now standing shoulder to shoulder as soldiers. They knew they were vastly outnumbered. Santa Anna's army, which would eventually swell to several thousand, was a professional fighting force, hardened by recent campaigns, and led by a man who had declared he would take no prisoners. As Santa Anna's forces began to encircle the fortress, a tense standoff ensued. From the Mexican lines, a blood-red banner was raised, a chilling, unmistakable signal in the language of war. No quarter would be given. Surrender was not an option. Victory or death were the only outcomes. The defenders' response was a single, defiant cannon shot, a blast that echoed across the plains, announcing their resolve to the world. The siege of the Alamo had officially begun. The initial hours were a flurry of activity. Men rushed to reinforce the walls, positioning cannons and stacking sandbags. Colonel William Barrett, Travis, the 26-year-old commander of the garrison, moved with a determined energy, issuing orders and steadying the nerves of his men. Alongside him was the legendary Jim Bowie, a fearsome fighter and frontiersman, though now confined to a cot by a debilitating illness. His spirit, however, remained unbroken, his presence a source of inspiration for everyone within the walls. And then there was Davy Crockett, the famous Tennessean, a former congressman known nationwide for his larger-than-life persona, had arrived at the Alamo just weeks earlier with his small company of volunteers. As the first Mexican shells began to arc over the walls, crashing into the compound, Crockett's character truly shone, while others might have felt the cold grip of fear. Crockett met the danger with an almost unbelievable calm and a disarming sense of humor. Clad in his buckskins and carrying his famous rifle, Old Betsy, he moved along the ramparts, a steadying presence amidst the chaos. When a cannonball would strike nearby, sending dust and debris flying, Crockett was known to crack a joke or offer a wry observation. He'd playfully dare the Mexican gunners to aim a little better, his laughter cutting through the sound of gunfire. This wasn't foolishness, it was a powerful form of leadership. His humor was a shield against the despair that could so easily take root in such a desperate situation. He showed the men that even in the face of overwhelming odds, they could maintain their dignity and their spirit. His courage was infectious, a vital source of morale that helped bind the small garrison together. As the first day bled into the first night, the heavy bombardment gave way to a different kind of trial. The cannons fell silent, but the silence was not peaceful. It was heavy, filled with anticipation and the unseen presence of the thousands of soldiers camped just beyond the walls. The darkness was punctuated only by the distant sounds of the enemy camp, the murmur of voices, the occasional bugle call, the crackle of countless campfires. For the defenders, these quiet nights were a profound test of a different kind of courage. The courage to wait. The courage to face one's own thoughts in the stillness, knowing what the dawn might bring. They stood watch on the cold stone walls, peering into the blackness, every shadow seeming to hold a threat. It was in these moments of profound silence that the true weight of their situation settled in. They were an island in a vast sea of hostility, cut off and alone. Yet, even in this oppressive quiet, the spirit of the Alamo held firm. Men shared stories of their homes and families, their voices low in the darkness. They spoke of the ideals of liberty that had brought them to this desolate patch of ground in Texas. They found strength in each other's company, a shared resolve that transcended the fear. This was courage not just on the battlefield under fire, but the deep, internal fortitude to endure the crushing psychological pressure of the weight. Each man had to confront his own mortality, and each man chose to stay. The initial days of the siege established a grim routine. By day, the defenders endured a near-constant bombardment from Santa Anna's artillery. They hunkered down, conserved their own limited ammunition, and took careful shots when targets presented themselves. At night, the Mexican army would often advance their positions under the cover of darkness, inching their trenches and artillery ever closer to the Alamo's walls. The defenders would strain their eyes in the dark, firing at any sign of movement, trying to disrupt the enemy's work. Through it all, the men looked to their leaders. Travis, ever the formal officer, penned his now famous letters to the people of Texas and the world, his words filled with defiance and a plea for reinforcements that he knew might never come. Bowie, from his sickbed, offered counsel and encouragement, and Crockett, with his fiddle and his stories, reminded them all of their humanity. He would often play a tune in the evening, the lively notes a stark contrast to their grim reality, a small act of rebellion against the encroaching darkness. This was the beginning. A small band of rebels, trapped and outnumbered, facing the full might of an enraged dictator. They were surrounded, with no immediate hope of relief. But within the crumbling walls of the old mission, a powerful legend was being forged, a story of incredible bravery, unwavering resolve, and the quiet courage to stand firm in the face of the inevitable. The siege had begun, and the world would soon know the name of the Alamo. Thank you so much for joining me for this chapter. The story of the Alamo is a powerful reminder of the human spirit's capacity for courage. If you found this story as moving as I do, please hit that like button. And be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss what happens next. We'll see you in the next video. Howdy folks, and welcome back to our journey through the pages of history. Today, we're stepping into a place where legends were forged in fire and ink, the Alamo. We're going to look beyond the grand narrative of the battle itself and listen to the personal, intimate voice of one of its most famous defenders, Davy Crockett, through his final known letters. Imagine the scene. It's late February, 1836. The air in San Antonio de Bexa is thick with tension. The walls of the Alamo mission, once a place of peace, are now a fortress, a symbol of defiance. Inside, surrounded by a growing Mexican army, a small band of men prepares for the fight of their lives. Among them is David Crockett, the frontiersman, the former congressman, the living legend. He picks up his pen, not knowing these would be his last words to the world, his final testament. These letters are not the bombastic pronouncements of a larger-than-life hero. They are the words of a man, a father, a husband. They are humble, yet filled with a quiet, unshakable resolve. In one letter he writes to his children, his words painting a picture of a man who, even in the face of overwhelming odds, is thinking of his family, of the life he built, and the legacy he hopes to leave behind. He speaks of the land, of the future he sees for Texas, a future he believes is worth fighting for, worth everything. There's a sense of pride in his writing, but it's not an arrogant pride. It's the pride of a man standing for his principles. He tells his family not to worry, that he is among friends and patriots. He describes the fort, the spirit of the men, a mix of hope and grim determination. He mentions Colonel Travis and Jim Bowie, names that would soon be etched into legend alongside his own. He conveys a sense of unity, of a shared purpose that transcended their individual fears. These men, from different backgrounds and walks of life, were bound together by a common belief in freedom. We are determined to defend the Alamo to the last. This single, powerful line echoes through time. It is not a boast. It is a simple statement of fact, a promise made to themselves and to the cause they served. When you read this, you can almost feel the weight of that commitment. It's a declaration that they have drawn a line in the sand, that retreat is not an option. It is a reflection of the deep-seated conviction that the principles they were defending, liberty and self-determination, were more valuable than life itself. As the siege tightens, you can feel a shift in the tone. The letters become a meditation on purpose, on freedom, and, inevitably, on mortality. Crockett, a man who had faced the wild frontier, political battles, and personal loss, was now confronting his own end. Yet, there is no trace of despair in his words. Instead, there's an acceptance, a clarity that comes when everything is stripped away except for what truly matters. He reflects on the path that led him to this dusty mission in Texas, so far from his home in Tennessee. It was a path guided by a restless spirit and an unwavering belief in the rights of the common man. In these final dispatches, his thoughts constantly drift back home. He speaks to his beloved wife, Polly, and his children. He worries about their well-being, about the farm, about the small, everyday details of the life he has been forced to leave behind. He writes of unfinished dreams, not with regret, but with a hope that others will carry them forward. He paints a picture of a future he will not see, a future where his children can live in a land of opportunity and freedom, the very ideals for which he is about to make the ultimate sacrifice. These aren't just historical documents. They are love letters. They are a father's final words of guidance, a husband's last expression of affection. He's trying to comfort his family from a distance, to reassure them that his stand is a worthy one. He wants them to be proud. He knows the pain his loss will cause, and that weighs on him as heavily as the enemy cannons outside the walls. His concern for them is a poignant reminder that behind every hero of history is a human heart, with all its connections, its loves, and its vulnerabilities. In one of his last known communications, believed to be a message carried out by a courier, the tone is resolute. He describes the constant bombardment, the escalating danger, but also the unbroken spirit of the defenders. He asks for reinforcements, for aid, but makes it clear that they will hold their ground regardless. It's a testament to the leadership within the fortmen like Travis, Bowie, and Crockett himself, who inspired others to stand firm in the face of certain doom. They knew the odds were impossible, but they also knew the symbolic power of their resistance. Reading these letters today offers us a profound insight. It allows us to see Davy Crockett not just as the coonskin cap-wearing caricature of legend, but as a thoughtful, principled man facing the end with courage and dignity. He was a man who understood the price of freedom and was willing to pay it. His words are a powerful reminder that history is not just about dates and battles. It's about people, their hopes, their fears, and the choices they make in their most defining moments. The ink on those pages dried over 180 years ago, but the spirit they contain is timeless. They speak of sacrifice, of love for family, and of an unyielding belief in a cause greater than oneself. Crockett and the defenders of the Alamo did not get to see the future they fought for, but their stand ignited a fire across Texas. Their story, carried in part by these final, heartfelt letters, became a rallying cry. Remember the Alamo, that fueled the fight for independence and shaped the course of a nation. These humbled, hopeful, and proud letters are Davy Crockett's true legacy. They are not just artifacts from a bygone era. They are a conversation across time, a final message from a man who, in his last days, wanted the world, and especially his family, to know what he stood for. And in knowing that, we get to know the real man behind the legend. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into a very personal piece of history. If you found this story as moving as I do, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories that bring the past to life. Drop a comment below and let me know what part of Crockett's story resonates most with you. Until next time, stay curious. Welcome back to our series. Today, we delve into the heart of the storm, the climax of a 13-day siege that has become a cornerstone of American folklore. This is Chapter 18, The Final Assault on the Alamo. The date is March 6, 1836. The air in San Antonio. Die Bexar is thick with a cold. Pre-dawn. Stillness. Inside the walls of the old mission, a small garrison of Texan defenders, a mix of Texians and Tejanos, has held out for nearly 2 weeks against the vastly superior Mexican army led by General Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna. For 12 days, they have endured near constant bombardment, skirmishes, and the psychological strain of knowing that reinforcements are unlikely to arrive in time. The men are exhausted, their supplies dwindling, but their resolve remains unbroken. They are commanded by William Barrett Travis, a young, determined lawyer who, in a famous letter, declared victory or death. Alongside him are two towering figures of the American frontier. Jim Bowie, the legendary knife fighter, now bedridden with a debilitating illness, but still a symbol of defiance, and David Crockett, the former congressman from Tennessee, whose large persona brought a flicker of celebrity and hope to the besieged fort. As the last stars of the Texas night begin to fade, the silence is shattered. It's just before 5 a.m. Suddenly, from all four sides, the blare of bugles cuts through the dark. The Mexican army is advancing. This is not another skirmish. This is the final, overwhelming assault. Santa Anna has chosen this pre-dawn hour to maximize confusion and surprise. Thousands of Mexican soldiers, organized into 4 columns, surge forward towards the Alamo's fortified walls. They are ordered to take no prisoners. The cry "Viva Santa Anna" echoes across the field, a chilling promise of the battle to come. Inside the Alamo, the defenders scramble to their posts. The sentries' shouts of alarm are quickly drowned out by the thunderous roar of cannons. The Texans' artillery, which had been a crucial part of their defense, opens up, tearing devastating gaps in the advancing Mexican columns. Grape shot and canister rounds rip through the tightly packed ranks. For a moment, the initial wave of the assault falters under the punishing fire. The attackers are thrown back, but their numbers are immense. The sheer weight of the Mexican army is a force of nature, a human tide that cannot be easily stopped. The air fills with a thick, acrid smoke from the cannons and muskets, creating a chaotic and disorienting veil over the battlefield. Visibility drops to mere feet. In the confusing gloom, friends and foes are hard to distinguish. The fighting becomes a desperate, close-quarters struggle. The Mexican soldiers press on, climbing over their fallen comrades to reach the walls. They bring scaling ladders, and despite the defenders' furious efforts to push them back, the attackers begin to breach the perimeter. The north wall is the first to be overwhelmed. Once one section is breached, the defensive integrity of the entire compound begins to crumble. Mexican soldiers pour into the plaza. The battle shifts from a siege defense to a brutal, hand-to-hand fight within the mission itself. The Texans fall back to the long barracks in the chapel, turning every room and doorway into a new defensive position. The fighting is savage and personal. It's the crack of rifles, the clash of bayonets, the desperate shouts of men fighting for their very lives in a maelstrom of violence and chaos. Travis is one of the first commanders to fall, struck down defending the north wall. Bowie, de ill to stand, is said to have met his end in his cot, fighting back with his pistols until he was overwhelmed. And what of David Crockett? Here, history blurs into legend, and accounts diverge, creating a debate that continues to this day. The traditional, heroic narrative, the one that has been immortalized in countless books and films, paints a vivid picture of Crockett's last moments. In this version, surrounded by the bodies of the soldiers he had taken down, he stands near the chapel, swinging his empty rifle, Old Betsy, like a club. He fights with the ferocity of a cornered bear, a final, defiant act of resistance against impossible odds, going down as a true frontier hero, fighting to his very last breath. It's a powerful and inspiring image, a testament to the indomitable spirit of the Alamo's defenders. However, a different, more controversial account emerged years later, based primarily on the diary of a Mexican officer, José Enrique de la Peña. According to de la Peña, Crockett and a handful of other defenders did not die fighting in the chaos. Instead, they were captured after the main battle had subsided. They were brought before General Santa Anna, who, in a fit of rage and contempt for the defeated rebels, ordered their immediate execution. In this telling, Crockett's end was not in the heat of battle, but in a cold, calculated act of post-combat brutality. He and the others were bayoneted and shot by the soldiers. This version presents a grimmer, perhaps more historically complex, reality. It doesn't diminish Crockett's bravery, but it reframes his final moments from a defiant last end to a tragic execution. Which story is true? We may never know for certain. Historians continued to debate the evidence, and both accounts have their proponents, but in a way, the specific details of his death are secondary to what he came to represent. Whether he fell in a blaze of glory or was executed after capture, the outcome was the same. David Crockett, the man, died at the Alamo on March 6, 1836. The entire assault lasted no more than 90 minutes. By the time the sun rose over San Antonio, the guns were silent. The Alamo had fallen. Every single one of its combatant defenders was dead. The battle was a tactical victory for Santa Anna, but it would prove to be a catastrophic strategic mistake. The very brutality of the assault, and the order to take no prisoners, ignited a fire across Texas. The story of the Alamo, and the fate of men like Travis, Bowie, and Crockett, became a powerful rallying cry. Remember, the Alamo was not just a slogan. It was a vow of vengeance and a declaration of independence. The sacrifice of the men inside those walls galvanized the Texan spirit and inspired a surge of volunteers to join the Revolutionary Army. Just a few weeks later, at the Battle of San Jacinto, a Texan army under Sam Houston would achieve a stunning and decisive victory over Santa Anna's forces. Shouting, "Remember the Alamo?" they routed the Mexican army in a mere 18 minutes, securing Texas's independence. The fall of the Alamo marked the end of David Crockett the man, but it was the birth of David Crockett the legend. His death, intertwined with the mythos of the Alamo, transformed him from a well-known frontiersman and politician into an enduring American icon. He became a symbol of courage, sacrifice, and the fight for freedom against overwhelming odds. The story of his final stand, regardless of which version you believe, continues to capture the imagination, reminding us of a pivotal and bloody chapter in the forging of a nation. The man was gone, but the legend would live forever. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into one of history's most compelling moments. If you found this story as fascinating as we do, please hit that like button, subscribe to our channel for more content, and ring the bell so you never miss an update. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Until next time, stay curious. Even after the smoke cleared at the Alamo, the story of Davy Crockett was far from over. In fact, in death, he became larger than life, transforming from a frontiersman and politician into an American legend. The man was gone, but the myth was just beginning. Welcome back to our series, where today we explore how the legend of Davy Crockett lived on, capturing the imagination of a nation and becoming a symbol of the American spirit. Almost immediately after his death in 1836, stories about Crockett began to circulate, each one more incredible than the last. He wasn't just a man who died at the Alamo. He was the last man standing, fighting off waves of soldiers with his bare hands and his trusty rifle. Old Betsy. These tailies painted him as a superhuman figure. He wasn't just a hunter. He was the greatest bear hunter in all of Tennessee, a man who once grinned a raccoon right out of a tree. He wasn't just a scout. He was a fearless Indian fighter who understood the ways of the wilderness better than anyone. He became the man who could outrun destiny itself, even if it finally caught up with him in San Antonio. These weren't just campfire stories. They were a cultural phenomenon. Throughout the 19th century, America was a young, boisterous nation trying to define itself, and it needed heroes. Davy Crockett fit the bill perfectly. His legend was spread through wildly popular almanacs, pamphlets, and dime novels. These publications were the 19th century equivalent of blockbuster movies, filled with exaggerated exploits and heroic deeds. They told tales of him wrestling alligators, riding a bolt of lightning, and even thawing the frozen gears of the sun on a particularly cold morning with a bit of bear grease. It was pure fantasy, but people loved it. They needed a hero who was tough, independent, and a little bit wild, just like the country itself. The stage also fell in love with Davy Crockett. Plays like The Lion of the West were massive hits, featuring a charismatic, buckskin-clad hero based on Crockett. These theatrical productions brought the myth to life for urban audiences who had never seen the frontier. They saw a character who spoke his mind, wasn't afraid of a fight, and embodied the democratic ideal of the common man rising to greatness. Songs and ballads were written about him, sung in parlors and taverns across the country. The Ballad of Davy Crockett wasn't just a 20th century creation. Its roots go way back, with countless folk songs celebrating his adventures long before Hollywood ever existed. For a while, the legend simmered. Other heroes and other wars captured the public's attention. But then, in the 1950s, something incredible happened. A new medium, television, was entering American homes, and a man named Walt Disney decided to reintroduce the nation to its old hero. The Disney miniseries, Davy Crockett, King of the Wild Frontier, starring Fess Parker, was an absolute sensation. It triggered a national craze, unlike anything seen before. Suddenly, every kid in America wanted a coonskin cap. The theme song, The Ballad of Davy Crockett, shot to the top of the music charts and stayed there for weeks. The Disney version presented a sanitized, noble version of Crockett. He was a man of unwavering integrity, a friend to all, and a true patriot. This portrayal glossed over the rougher edges of the historical figure, his political maneuvering, his complex relationship with Native Americans, and the brutal realities of frontier life. But it didn't matter. This was the Crockett a post-war America was ready for. A clean-cut hero who always did the right thing. He was brave, honest, and stood for freedom. The show was so popular that even after the character died at the Alamo in the 3rd episode, Disney had to bring him back for 2 more prequel episodes to satisfy public demand. The craze was real, and it cemented Crockett's place in the pantheon of American icons for a whole new generation. So, why does this legend endure? Why, after all these years, do we still talk about Davy Crockett? It's because he represents something essential to the American identity: rugged individualism. He is the ultimate self-made man. He was born in poverty on the frontier and, through sheer grit, determination, and character, became a respected leader and a national hero. He embodies the idea that you don't need a fancy education or a wealthy family to make your mark on the world. All you need is a strong will and a true heart. He is the spirit of the pioneer, the adventurer, the person who isn't afraid to head into the unknown to build a better life. In the 19th century, he was a symbol of westward expansion and manifest destiny. In the 1950s, he was a symbol of Cold War-era patriotism and moral certainty. And today, the legend of Davy Crockett continues to evolve. We look back at the myth and the man, and we see a complex figure who reflects our nation's own complex history. He reminds us of a time when the country was still being forged, a time of both incredible opportunity and immense hardship. The tall tales of him riding a comet or wrestling a bear are fun, but the real power of his legend lies in what he represents: the untamed, optimistic, and fiercely independent spirit that America has always seen in itself. He wasn't born a king, but a nation made him one. The king of the wild frontier. And that's the story of how a frontiersman from Tennessee became an immortal American legend. The man may have fallen at the Alamo, but the idea he represents lives on in the stories we tell and the heroes we admire. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey through history. If you enjoyed this deep dive, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. Drop a comment below and let me know which American legend you'd like to see covered next. Until then, keep exploring. As the last embers of our campfire dance against the vast, dark canvas of the night, we re-left with a question that has echoed through the generations. Who was the real Davy Crockett? Was he the larger-than-life legend, wrestling bears and grinning down raccoons? Or was he the humble frontiersman, the reluctant politician, the man who ultimately gave his life for a cause he believed in? The truth, as it often is, lies somewhere in the quiet space between the myth and the man. The real Davy Crockett wasn't a superhero carved from stone. He was a man of flesh and blood, shaped by the wild, untamed beauty of the American frontier. He was flawed. Certainly, he could be stubborn, perhaps a bit naive in the cutthroat world of Washington politics. He made mistakes, faced disappointments, and knew the sting of failure just as keenly as he knew the thrill of victory. But it is in these very imperfections that we find his true strength. His was a humanity that is relatable, a courage that wasn't born of fearlessness, but of acting in spite of fear. He was a husband and a father, a neighbor and a friend. He was a storyteller who could hold a crowd captive with a well-spun yarn, his eyes twinkling with the same light we see in these dancing flames. He was a leader who inspired not through commands, but through character. He represented a spirit that was uniquely Americana, fierce independence, tempered by a deep-seated belief in community, and a commitment to what was right, even when it was the harder path to walk. He wasn't just a hero on a pedestal. He was an everyman who rose to heroic heights. He was one of us, and that is precisely what makes his story so powerful. Think about the world he inhabited, a world of dense forests, roaring rivers, and endless skies, a world where survival depended on wit, resilience, and a profound respect for the natural world. Davy Crockett was a product of that environment. He understood its rhythms, its dangers, and its gifts. His famous motto, "Be sure you're right, then go ahead," wasn't just a catchy phrase. It was a philosophy forged in the wilderness, where a wrong turn or a moment's hesitation could have dire consequences. It is a principle that guided him from the backwoods of Tennessee all the way to the halls of Congress. In Washington, he was an anomaly, a man in a buckskin jacket walking among men in tailored suits. He fought for the common folk, the settlers and squatters, who were often forgotten by the powerful. He stood against President Andrew Jackson's Indian Removal Act, a decision that cost him his political career but cemented his moral legacy. It was a brave and lonely stand, a testament to his conviction that being right was more important than being popular or powerful. He showed us that integrity isn't about winning every battle, but about choosing which battles are worth fighting. The physical frontier that Davy Crockett knew, that vast, uncharted wilderness may be gone. We have mapped the rivers and tamed the forests. The world has grown smaller, more connected. Yet, the spirit of the frontier, the spirit that Crockett embodied, is not confined to a place or a time. It's a state of mind. It's the courage to venture into the unknown, whether it's starting a new business, pursuing a creative passion, or simply speaking up for what you believe in. It's the resilience to get back up after you've been knocked down, to dust yourself off and keep moving forward. His story continues to stir something deep within us. It awakens that longing for freedom, for authenticity, for a life lived with purpose and conviction. It reminds us that ordinary people are capable of extraordinary things. It's a call to adventure, not necessarily into the deep woods, but into the undiscovered territories of our own potential. The legacy of Davy Crockett isn't just a historical footnote. It's a living, breathing inspiration. It's the idea that one person, armed with courage and a clear conscience, can indeed make a difference. He wasn't perfect, and we do his memory a disservice by pretending he was. He was a man of his time, with the prejudices and blind spots of his era. But through it all, a fundamental decency and a heroic spirit shone through. He was a hunter who became a lawmaker, a storyteller who became a symbol, a man who became a legend. His journey from the canebrakes of Tennessee to the final, desperate stand in Texas is the stuff of epic poetry, an American odyssey. As our fire burns low and the night grows still, we can almost hear the echoes of the past. The crackle of the flames sounds like the rustle of leaves in a long-vanished forest. The wind carries the whispers of forgotten stories, of bravery, and of sacrifice. The story of Davy Crockett doesn't end in victory. It ends in a dusty, crumbling mission in San Antonio. It ends in a fight for a republic he had only just joined. But in that end, there is a powerful beginning. The beginning of a legend that would far outlive the man. The frontier may be closed, but the spirit of Davy Crockett invites us to find our own wilderness to explore, our own principles to defend, our own story to write. His life is a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit, flawed, brave, and undeniably free. And in the quiet that settles over us now, with only the glowing embers left to light the darkness, one final whisper hangs in the air, a solemn, timeless promise. Remember the Alamo. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey into the life of a true American icon. If you found this story as fascinating as I do, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel for more explorations into history. We'll see you next time.